Welcome to the Good Rookie Show. My name is Fahim.
And my name is Nelly J, y'all. And we are Good Rookie.
That's right.
What's going on, everybody? Happy Good Tuesday. And guess what? It's the Good Rookie Show. Yep. What's going on, everybody? As you know, we're your hosts coming to you from Toronto, Canada, the 6th. And this week, you understand, we have a returning guest. It's been 3 years for him, and it's his third time. Please introduce who we got.
Well, you mentioned it's his third time. This is somebody, I guess, we say Good Rookie's family because he's somebody a recurring, supporting the movement. So it's going to be, especially when he brings something that we normally don't have, is really somebody who's specific to the fight game. So it's going to be great to have his insight with this. Let's welcome Giancarlo Aulino to the podcast.
Giancarlo. What up, Giancarlo? How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Always love those intros. Those are amazing. Appreciate the great intro and the warm welcome. Happy to be back again.
Are we still running with Woodbridge's finest?
I like it. If you guys want to give me that name, I'm good.
If you like it, we love it. You know what I'm saying? Giancarlo, I know you watch TFC, you follow them, you go to the games, but I mean, Fahim and I declared when Messi came to Miami that we're going to be Inter Miami fans now. Like, we like TFC, we'll support y'all, but we're Inter Miami fans heavy. What's your thoughts? Are you still a TFC fan, or are you watching more Inter Miami games like us? Give us your thoughts on that real quick.
Yeah, I've covering the team. I don't blame a lot of fans if they want to just jump ship. Like, obviously, they're not being paid by the team, so by all means,
I wouldn't say jump ship. I'd say maybe just kind of paddle to the other team. You know?
Yeah, just paddle over,
casual paddle, just around.
I mean, I watch UFC games sometimes, but the Messi games have been so good. You can't deny that, man.
They've been fun, and I've caught myself like just watching Inter Miami games as well, and they're exciting. The whole Leagues Cup that they had, I thought it wouldn't be as entertaining, but they proved everybody wrong. Apple TV clearly has loved it. They've seen a ton of subscribers, so it's working. The whole Messi partnership, Messi's going to get some cut of that, so good for him. He got a great deal, and Miami is just even their social media. I've noticed like they're among some of the highest followed teams right now, which is crazy. Just what one player can bring is crazy.
When you say highest followed team, is that in the MLS?
Yeah, I even think MLS, North America, like I believe they had like a few 100,000 followers. And then Messi was announced, it went up to like 6 million. And I think that number keeps on growing every day.
Oh, yeah. Wow, yeah.
Messi got it like that, though. He got it like that. You can't even deny. Shoot.
Yeah, he does.
So, Giancarlo, since, like I mentioned off the top, you're heavily involved with the fight game, whether it's boxing, whether it's MMA, whether it's wrestling. So when we came across this, there's an antitrust lawsuit that's being filed against the UFC. Give us some details in regards to what you know about that.
Yeah. So just what I've seen out of it, 2 fighters. One of them I actually interviewed a few years ago when he fought in Bellator, John Fitch. He's one of the fighters that have come forward. Kung Lee's another one. He was another fighter that was entertaining, even did some acting as well. They've come up, and I think it's a lot of fighters. So if a fighter competed under the UFC banner from the time the lawsuit was filed, and now they're entitled to it. So they don't have to sign their name. They don't have to like join any causes, join any movements, go publicly against the UFC. They would automatically be entitled to that. So that's something where some fighters can voice their support to the fellow guys like John Fitch. They can tell them they support him without going public and maybe jeopardizing if they're in the UFC right now, and maybe even made their debut in like 2014, 2015. So I think it's beneficial to them as well, because they're in a situation where they can support the cause without, publicly putting their name out there and get themselves involved with Dana White and get on their bad side.
So with the lawsuit, it says that they is filed that the UFC had an illegal monopoly on competition to bring down the prices for fighters' wages. Okay, so there is Bellator also. That was an option also. So when they say a monopoly, I'm not sure where they're getting the monopoly fund if there are other players, but mind you, they're not UFC caliber. They're not as big.
Yeah.
But is it that the UFC is doing something to even prevent these guys to leaving UFC to go to maybe Bellator where they can get other options, or do you know the details of that?
Yeah, so from what I know, like when this lawsuit, I'm guessing when it came forward, the year that they started it, Bellator wasn't really a name, like a big time prominent promotion.
Right.
Strikeforce had been just purchased by the UFC, and they merged together. Pride was bought by the UFC in the mid 2000s, so that was another massive promotion for some of these fighters. They were in Japan, and now recently, the owner of that started his own called Ryzen. That was in 2015, so they're not at that level they were in Pride, but they're slowly building up again, but it's still not to the level of the UFC. And now there's one championship. So there are other promotions, just like the UFC at that time was a monopoly, and they do hold fighters into some contracts like GSP, even though he retired in 2019. He was still under contract with the UFC because he had a few fights left, and he had to wait until the length of the deal was expired, even though he had no interest in fighting. And they stopped him from doing a boxing match with Oscar De La Hoya. So it shows the kind of power and leverage they do have. And until a fighter is actually free, the UFC do like some say in what they can do.
So I find that interesting because like you said, they had a monopoly, and I agree, especially like at the time, if this goes back to 10 years. But this is going to be 1.6 billion in damages possible over. So that tells me that UFC has made so much more profit than we think they have. Like if they made over 1.6 billion in the last 10 years and these fighters might get that, wow. How much of a damage would this be? Sorry for him, I cut you off there, but I curious to know how much damage do you think, like, would that be a damage to UFC, or you think they can afford the 1.6 billion? Just out of curiosity, Giancarlo, you follow more than me.
Yeah, I think right now yes and no, it would be because they're going to be merging with WWE under a new like entity with their parent company. Endeavor bought the majority stake in WWE, and they're going to form a conglomerate company of one entity. It's going to be worth, I believe, like 23 billion at the end of the day when they come together. I think it's next month. It's going to be called TKO. So it might not damage them now, but when that merger goes through, it will affect their stock price in the short term if they see that there's a class action lawsuit lingering, and depends how long it's going. It's going to continue raising some doubt from shareholders. So I think from that aspect and the image of their brand, it will, but I think they have enough funds right now where they sold originally at that time, it was $4 billion, and now they're worth $9 billion. So I think it's just going to be coming down to giving some of these fighters all the money they took and they own at the end of the day, or at the end of the day. Sorry,
9 billion. That's more than some of these NFL teams franchises. Yeah. You know what I'm saying, y'all? Like, and they're paying quarterbacks 400 million a year. Sorry, 400 million for like 4 or 5 years, or I think 260. That's crazy. In like, so the fact that they're making 9 billion, look, thinking about other leagues, like I think they fight like what, 3 times a year maximum, Giancarlo? Fighters, or 4 times?
If they're active, I've seen some like 4, but that's really rare. Champions, sometimes you'll see 2, maybe 3 a year, but 2 is like the consistent average.
So if they're valued at 9 billion, I agree. They can afford that 1.6 or 2 billion, because they're saying now it's 3 times worth more the damages since it was back in 2014. But looking at the profit, and Fahim, I think you mentioned this last week. We had a topic about this and what they're paying fighters. Remember Themba Gorimbo? what they're paying like their fighters versus what, wow, they've made a lot of money. So, and the fact that the judge is fast tracking and going to court quicker because UFC wanted to appeal or discovery and they denied it. This judge wants them to go to court like now. So I don't know, man. Go ahead, Fahim. I had a question, but whew.
No, I was just going to ask if it's outdated. Like if they were to make that exact same lawsuit nowadays in today's climate today, do you think that it would still go through? Because I know it has to do with a lot that might have happened at the onset, but
Yeah,
things
10 years
change over
ago.
time, right? 10 years, lots happens over 10 years. So if they made that same claim today, Giancarlo, you're the judge. What would you do in this situation?
I think today it might be difficult just because the UFC can go back and say, well, look at Bellator. They're paying guys a lot more than what there's worth in some of the fans' eyes. They don't have a pay-per-view model, and they're paying guys like double at the UFC in some cases. And then there's one championship who throw a lot of money, and their resources in Asia are well that they're looking at expanding. And then they can say, well, the PFL, they have the ESPN deal. So I think the UFC, even though they like to say that they're the leader, and they are with pay-per-view numbers that come out, I think they would play and make themselves look as small as possible and on an even playing field, just strategically to make it go through where it's not like of any like problem for them. Meanwhile, they would say, yeah, we do make a lot of money, and we are like head and shoulders above everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Question for you. Do you think UFC fighters should have their own players union? Like, you know how like we have players union for like NBA. Do you think that they should have their own union? And can they have their own union if they wanted to, UFC fighters?
I think it's possible. Like, even though they are under contract, some of them they get cut after like 3 fights. Like, let's say they go on a losing streak. I think it's still possible if they have a certain amount of fights. Like, I actually spoke about this topic with Dan Severn, who's in the Hall of Fame, a
Yeah.
few months back, and he actually gave a pretty good idea about this. Like, if you put a X amount of dollars into this fund and the promotion's not allowed to touch it for like 5 to 10 years and just collect interest after 10 years, then you can go back to the fighters that have, let's say, 20 fights, 15 fights under the UFC and make some programs where they can start taking money out of that. And when they're retired, maybe they fall in hard times, maybe like money's not like they can't afford to fight anymore because of injuries. They can at least support themselves based on the money over the 15 to 20 fights that they put into the UFC.
Especially healthcare, because somebody's got to have families, they have children.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes they can't fight. There's things like CTE and things that can really damage you. So yeah, there should be. I mean, I've always been saying this too. I would love UFC fighters or MMA fighters to have their own union so that it protects them when they go towards these actual leagues. Like, hey, you want to sign me, you got to go through the union and become a deal and protect these fighters because I get it, fighting like boxing. I just think that now with sport being entertainment, 9 billion is a lot of money that they're worth. Like, they can afford to protect these fighters if anything happens, that they can still be able to survive and live a good life. If, of course, they have a 5 to 10, whatever threshold that is that they agree to. It's like, hey, if you fight with us for 5 to 10 fights, we got you when it comes to medical, whatever that is. But I do think something got to be there for because they're making a lot of money. There's a big UFC fight pretty much now every weekend. Like, every weekend is a big fight now. Right, it's like getting more and more. There's more fighters. There's way more storylines. Like, there's a lot of money around this sport. So, I mean, I really hope someone is trying to do that for the players because that'd be good for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On the way out of this, any thoughts on the UFC fighter that Nelly J just brought up, Thembo Garimbo? Any thoughts on that?
Themba Garimbo. Themba.
Was that the one The Rock bought the house for?
That is
Yeah.
I think it was a nice story, and I just felt bad like watching that because you show like he takes like in the gym, he's training, he lives there, and I don't know, it kind of was a message that like sometimes people maybe think or take other things for granted at times. Like, that for him was, he was considering that like he made it, which is fortunate, unfortunate at the same time, and good for The Rock for paying for his house and allowing him to bring his family here. So I thought that was a nice story, and it just shows like some fighters, like I wonder what the base salary is because it's not really reported 100% accurate. Like, it shows what the commission what they get from them, but their actual numbers of how much they make leads you to believe that maybe they don't make so much for being in the worldwide leader of MMA.
Right. All right. Well, I like I was saying before, I'm a casual UFC follower. If it's a big name, I'll follow. I'm more into boxing, but Themba Garimbo, I'm definitely his next fight. I'm tuning in. I thought that what The Rock did with buying in my house, um, that was a good look for the league. I think a lot of people can identify with just the struggle and grind. Let me ask you this: do you think? I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch him. Like I said, he's very new, so maybe you didn't get a chance. What do you think the odds are that he becomes a champion?
I think it's possible, but just right now with the division he's in, it's going to take a long time. Like
Oh,
2
really?
years if he
Uh-huh.
like can get a winning streak going. It's because
Mhm.
like the UFC, like you mentioned, like if there's a name that is popular and selling pay-per-views, like let's say Conor McGregor, even though he's lost his last few fights, if he gets one win, he's getting a title shot. So
Right, right.
that's a game that they play, and it is a popularity contest at times, but at the end of the day, like if a fighter continues winning and winning, it's going to be hard to like just look past them and just overlook them for a title shot.
Mhm.
True indeed. All right. It's about that time. Ellie J, let's go to For the Culture.
For the culture, we like to highlight individuals for the culture. And today we get to highlight our amazing guest, Giancarlo. That's right, y'all. So Giancarlo, he's a contributor, a news writer, interviewer, podcast. He manages different social media accounts. He's a very busy person, covers multiple teams. But I would say, Giancarlo, one thing that I've noticed, especially on Instagram, is that you definitely are grinding. I've been seeing quite a few interviews with different types of, from actors to wrestlers to, commentators, to everyone that you're speaking with. But you've been at this for a while, and you have over is it how many have you? I think over 1,000 stories you've written for Sportskeeda, which is crazy,
Oh
y'all.
yeah.
Over 1,000 grinding. So, Giancarlo, what have you been up to as late? And we'd love to hear more about, what's your goals? Because I think like, you've been on this sports game for a long time, but how has it been actually writing for MMA, wrestling, covering the sports vibe 105? Like you're doing it all. So walk us through that, my dear.
Yeah, it's fun. Like if you're not enjoying it, then there's no point. So it's fun getting like your own interviews and like reaching out, and you never know, even though they're out of your like follow range, send it anyway, because I've done it so many times, and I was actually surprised that the responses I would get from somebody who has like 1 million or 2 million followers, and I wouldn't get that from someone who has like 20,000 followers, which goes to show like one still humble and other ones maybe full of themselves at some points, but it's okay.
That's a
So
fact.
I think it's like just keep on doing it. And right now at 5105, like our sports program, we keep on working on it from the digital side, and keep on getting interviews. Just this week had Jordan Peruzza, who's on loan from Toronto FC's in Halifax now. He shared his story of playing for the team. And just today, you guys are the first ones to hear this. You mentioned Inter Miami. We have a player from Inter Miami, Kamal Miller, Scarborough's own, World Cup
Woo!
player for Canada. He talked about
Mm-hmm.
playing with Messi, playing with
Wow.
Busquets, playing with Jordi Alba, and winning that League's Cup. He scored a nice penalty in there. So got the latest out of Kamal Miller.
That is dope. Yeah, Kamal Miller, like he has been very, I think one of the faces of the Canadian soccer team, and now he's playing with Messi. So I could imagine. Can't wait. And that's dropping when, Giancarlo, that interview.
That will be this weekend on our YouTube channel and on Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts there. So Kamal Miller, Scarborough's finest.
That is dope. There's actually a question I have for you as well. In regards to your interviewers, right? Like, is there ever someone, okay, so have you ever interviewed somebody where it's like you ask the question and it's like an awkward silence because like they don't know, like it's like they're just like, what are you asking me? Has that ever happened to you before? And if it has, how do you kind of get through that?
Yeah, it has happened, and it gets kind of awkward. So I just try to ask it in a different way. So if there's like an awkward silence, just bring the same question and try to change up how I asked it, get a small answer to that. Then from that answer, build off and still ask the same question, but see if they'll give more. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I think everybody's had those kind of awkward questions with
Yeah.
just the silence.
No, it's good because I think people think, oh, interviewing someone is easy, but like you're meeting someone for the first time. Like me, like
Yeah.
we're all in the same, we're all in Toronto. So us interviewing you is like we're just talking, it's conversation, it's casual. But I can imagine interviewing someone that you never met. You met them through social media. You're talking for the first time on your computer, and you're like, there has to be some type of awkward moment. So it's always good to understand that like this gig is not easy, especially when you're talking to someone that you never met before. What would you say especially in the MMA world and wrestling? What has been the hottest like topics or I guess people? Because I feel like I don't really follow wrestling as much as I used to. Like I see highlights on, I would say I see highlights on Vibe on your Instagram. But like what's the latest like hot topic right now in wrestling? What we got over there?
Right now, one of the hotter topics is AEW. So WWE's competitor, they sold out Wembley Stadium, and this weekend they have an event called All In, and it just shows like they're not really too far along. It's only been a few years. 2019 is when they first started running shows, and already Wembley Stadium. So that's going to be huge.
Wow.
It's a sellout right now. So there's going to be well over 80,000 people there, and that's a big win
Wow.
for them.
That is 80,000 already? And they started when? You said 2 years ago they started AEW.
Yeah, 2019, and then the pandemics, they had nobody. Then they ran shows with like minimal crowds, and even actually in June they had an event here in Toronto, their first pay-per-view. They went on a full Canadian tour and looked successful. Fans, when I was there at the event, both nights packed, and yeah, they
Wow.
all seem to love it.
That is crazy.
Do they have any type of wrestling in the UK?
I think there's small regional promotions there, but in terms of like WWE for that market, I think they all just rely on WWE. They get programming from there on TNT UK or TNT Sports UK over there. So it's kind of like the UFC, like they'll distribute all over the world, and it kind of leads to some of those countries like they could get into it, but they can just pay the distribution and have the top viewed pro wrestling promotion out there.
So that's a smart move for them then. If there's an appetite for wrestling over there, and the big players aren't going over there, that's it's really smart for them to go there. 80,000 at Wembley, that's success. From that's going to obviously get media, especially over there. It's going to be part of the news story for a few days. So when people think wrestling, they'll be thinking AEW. So I mean, and that's all it takes. Sometimes you have to, think globally, right? So, is there? Oh, so I guess wrestling's obviously biggest in North America. Outside, like I would think maybe in Brazil, or is there no other wrestling type organizations that are competing?
The biggest that I can think of is in Japan, New Japan Pro Wrestling, but they have partnerships with AEW. They have partnerships with Impact, who's another wrestling company that used to be like viewed in that light as AEW when they started out, but now they're more of like just under their Toronto based or Toronto owned. And I think like Mexico has a rich history with AAA, but I still think WWE, it's so hard to compete with that. They're like 50 years, 60 years of just billions and billions of dollars. And now with merging with the UFC, I think it's really difficult. Unless you're a multi-billionaire and a fan, it's going to be hard to go up and compete with that.
One last on the wrestling here. AEW. Is it operate the same? For instance, Bellator early out could be seen as a feeder for the UFC. Is that a possibility where could they establish themselves of not being like a feeder for the WWE?
I think they've done a good job of making themselves an alternative where if a guy from WWE who has a name and is popular. They're out of a contract. I think AEW can pick them up and offer them a better deal, maybe offer them a better circumstance to like just come in storyline character wise. So I think it's similar to like what WCW, which was another big company, did in the 90s. So I think they've established themselves as an alternative there.
So Giancarlo, now that you've had like, quite a few years now covering these teams, stuff like that, what advice do you have for anyone trying to come up in the media game, trying to come up in, especially in Toronto? Because I feel like it's very close-knit type community where like if you don't know people, you're not going to get a shot. So what advice do you have anyone listening as to how to kind of break through into the, media sports game in Toronto?
I think social media is a big help because if you network through there, like LinkedIn is another one, which especially for media, if you see somebody else's work, who they cover, maybe reach out, like their content, and then show, express your interest too. Twitter is another one. Reach out on Twitter. Look at some of the topics and trends that are going on right now, or X as it's called. I don't even know if they call it Twitter anymore, but like even going through Twitter and Facebook, actually Facebook not as much, but Instagram and Twitter, I think you can see a lot more content and find similar interests if you're looking for that kind of sport or even movies, like whatever that medium and media will be. I think find something similar and then reach out and try and network that way.
That's some good advice, especially like the power of social media is amazing. Like, especially if you're following you, like I've met so many people through just social media that I never met. Like there's a coach for Discover Shooting Stars that I stopped him because we follow him. He followed us because we had Coach Lee, big up to Coach Lee. She was on the podcast and he knew her. So he followed the podcast page and I saw him. I'm like, hey, another from Good Rookies. He was like, oh yeah, what's up? I'm like, we follow each other. Yeah, nice to meet you guys in person. It was just like, he follows us, we follow him, but we never met in person. So and he's like, yeah, like just, I'm like, come on the podcast. Like, yeah, no problem. So I agree. Social media, you can really network with people with that you would never network, and they can support your work, you support their work, and they kind of build a community there as well. My last question before we jump out for the culture is, we covered a topic and that's absurd. And I have to ask, because you're covering all these other fighting type leagues, will you be following or covering the pillow fighting league, Giancarlo? The pillow fighting league. Let us know your thoughts.
Probably not. It depends. So like you never know if there's like somebody like, let's say Mike Tyson is part of this undercard or main event, the curiosity factor would kick in, and I think I would just have to like tune in and say, okay, what's going on here? But if I just see a commercial, like probably not.
Probably not. So have you watched any of those fights? Because they're pretty aggressive. There's the pillow fighting and the power slapping league. Do you follow that one? The power slapping? Do you follow that league at all?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I'm not watching that. Like and they've got so much negative publicity.
Yes.
Just because of what you see, like the result of it, you can tell, yeah, this is made for social media. Just when it was on TV, you actually saw the aftermath of what happened. And yeah, when someone can't defend themselves, you just see them like what would happen and they get paid nothing. It's not worth it.
Agreed. Agreed. But thanks, Giancarlo, man. Like, definitely been following you. Guys, check him out on Sportskeeda, MMA Writer. He contributes for Vibe 105.5. Follow him on Instagram. Oh, what about your podcast? You're doing a podcast with your friends before. You're also doing that? And plug that as well.
Yeah, in the zone. Friend of mine, Chris. Haven't been doing it yet, waiting for the hockey season to start, but
perfect.
Austin Matthews re-signing. It's going to help us a lot.
I did see that yesterday. Big news. Are you shocked that he resigned? Are you shocked that Austin Matthews resigned? Or not?
I was actually surprised that he signed for, I believe it was like 4 years at 13.2. I actually thought if he was signing for that low term, it was going to be for like the max. So I'm kind of happy that they managed to get him on a reasonable deal for someone who led the league in goals and could continue to do that, just getting into his physical prime. And I think it just raises the league standard. Like you have to raise a salary cap around the league because a lot of these guys are making sure that their contract is not up at the end of 8 years. They're signing for 4 to 5, and they're going to want more money when that contract's up. So hopefully the league takes notice of that.
Did you say 4 years, 13 million?
Yeah.
That's what that's hockey,
For
man. The salary cap is very
for
low.
Austin Matthews,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the
For
salary
the
cap for hockey
NHL.
teams? Yeah, the NHL hockey, the salary cap is much
Yeah,
lower
pretty
than
low, 80.
NFL.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the lowest salary cap
of
than
all the sports, yeah, no,
yeah,
the major sports. No, I knew it was always lower, but for like you mentioned, Austin Matthews, he's pretty much superstar-ish. To be making 13 million over 4 years, it almost, bench players that don't touch the court in the NBA
Yeah.
make
That's
almost
crazy.
twice as much as that.
well, well, that's not what I would say. Depends, right? Because all the guys in rotation, they're making like 2 million though for him per
Yeah.
year. They're not making more than that. They're not. Like
Okay.
if you look at they're not making more than that. Even the bench players for the Spurs were making like in the 100,000s. They weren't making $1 million a year. But the salary cap for NHL is 83.5 million. And some teams are only spending 61.7 million.
So they're not even maxing out the contract or the cap.
Well, I mean, it's just a different level, right? 83.5 million. And how big is the roster in hockey? Is it like 15? Like
Yeah.
what is it?
18 probably.
18?
And then you can
Yeah.
have reserve players. So yeah, that's not a lot of
So that's not a lot of money. Yeah. So you're probably paying your top guys like maybe 15 million to 20 million maximum. And that's over probably like a 6-7 year. Right.
Yeah.
So but I think Austin Matthews too. I think Austin wants to win in Toronto. So yes, he's getting paid that much money, but it's the highest paid. I think right now the highest paid is Nathan for Avalanche, and his contract is 12.4 mil right now.
Yeah,
12.6 million he's getting paid, and that was the highest contract, right? So it was an 8-year, 100.8 million extension that he got. Right.
And it's crazy because hockey is like what I've noticed out of any sport, and I'm kind of surprised, like hockey media, hockey fans, they discourage a player from getting the most that they can get, and they encourage them to take less money. So I've never seen a sport like that. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. They're encouraging the player to take less money just so they can sign more players.
Yeah. So with Matthews' contract for him, he's the highest paid player right now with 13.25 mil. That's the highest paid
on the Leafs.
No, highest paid in the NHL, in the entire league. Because the highest paid player before him was who I named. It was Nathan McKinnon, and he was getting paid 12.6. He's now getting paid 53 million over 4 years. So 13.25 million a year he's getting paid.
That's crazy.
So he's the highest paid NHL player for the Maple Leafs, which makes sense because the Maple Leafs is the most valued franchise in the NHL. But still, to your point, compared to other leagues, the NHL is not one of the highest paid, sports, unfortunately. So I mean, it's more than the MLS. If we're not Messi, outside of Messi, everyone else is getting paid less than that. So
and now finally it's been clarified. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, yeah, just 4 years, 13. It blows my mind. So it's 5 years, 4 years, 53. It's 13.
Yeah. So I mean that's more. I mean, think about it, right? Sergei Ibaka making 11 million.
I thought he was making 4 year 13.
No. It's 13.25.
Oh yeah, 13
year.
each year.
Now,
okay.
That's where I was confused. I was like,
oh yeah. 13.25
4 years,
million.
13 mil. That's like what is
over 4 years? Oh hell no.
That's why I was like,
it's like, what did they do to make them agree to that?
Exactly. That's
right.
Okay.
Shoot, they got
I got it.
They got something on him. God damn it. No. But he's the highest paid player right now with 13.25, and we'll see who else signs the contracts. But yeah.
Got you. All right. So, Nelly J, let's close this out with our last. That's absurd.
That's absurd. What was absurd this week? What was absurd?
Creative, I must say. Tyreek Hill. He plays Madden the night before an opponent to see if he can get tails and little tricks to what that player does when he's meeting them on the field. Absurd, but creative.
Absurd. You know what? I don't think it's absurd. I think a lot of guys do that. don't think it's just him. Because you know what? Like, for those who play Madden, I played Madden back in the day. I don't play as much anymore. But when you play Madden, Fahim, you can actually do different simulations of like different teams playing each other. And you can typically kind of guesstimate. And Fahim, a lot of people use Madden for their bets too. So Madden is now, because Madden's pretty accurate. They do a really good job in trying to like, be, up to the team's like plays, how their style is, the coaches. Except for, of course, Belichick. Belichick has not given Madden any green light, so he's not even on Madden. But outside of him, typically, I think it's a really smart thing to do for him. And I think if I'm a player in an NFL, I mean, why not? Your thoughts, Giancarlo?
I don't fault them for trying that. That's actually creative. Like, you can find tendencies in Madden, but that's a video game too. But you have to also think like EA must know like a player, what their tendencies are on the field. They want to make it as realistic as possible. So it depends what the setting is on, because if it's on rookie and he's like seeing the AI go out there and just have their way with the defenders, it might lead them to get some bad info. But I don't know, because NFL 04, like I remember when I played that game as a kid, Michael Vick was unstoppable in that game. So I don't know what they can do to really mimic the reality, but if it works for him and it maybe makes him feel more confident, it might make him have a better performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think also my thing is also the defensive strategies too. Just, for him to figure out which routes is best. You know what I mean? What is DB's, type play, safety, right? Just kind of understanding the opponent. But I think Madden modern day is a lot more accurate than 04, 05, because typically they would actually have the player come into EA and they would kind of do their, their styles, whatever. But I think there's so much more data in sport now, like a lot of data, that they can I think have better accuracy. But to your point, it's not 100%, it's not real life. But I think with the data that they can formulate, like now you can look up data for everything. In fantasy, I could look up data for like O-line, for different players, speed, right? Everything in like online, you know what I'm saying? So if that's just me being a common day fan, I can imagine what EA has access to, right? To be able to like create these precise, and like we all know, how players are so like, their ratings on these video games, they get so upset, right? About ratings and stuff like that, and speed and all that. So now, like, very creative to what you, Fahim, said, but man, like Tyreek admitting this, I don't think he's the only one, y'all. I don't.
Wow. I mean, that's part of the absurd part. I think that technology has got to that point where people would see that as a viable option to look for tails in the game, because I never would have thought that. But obviously, I mean, it must be work for him to say this publicly, because it must be working. So we can't.
And he's a good player. So
he's like top 3 wide receiver right now. Justin Jefferson, he's like top 3, he's top 5 at least. Tyreek. So, hey, that's a wide receiver.
Well, Nelly J, let's put this episode in the books.
Y'all, that was a good rookie show. So as you guys know, this is our time for shout outs, and Giancarlo, as a special guest, the floor is yours.
Of course, I'm just gonna shout out to both of you for once again having me on here, gracing me with that amazing intro again, and calling me Woodbridge's finest.
Woodbridge's
nice.
finest.
So my shout outs to you, both of you.
Oh man, too kind, man, too kind. Well, my shout out, Giancarlo, is definitely to you. Thank you for always coming in here, because there's some things I don't really like. As being said, I'm a casual wrestling fan, but I kind of know the names. I like watching UFC, like especially the bigger fights or the fights that I enjoy. I'll definitely watch those fights, but it's always really great having you on here, dropping the knowledge about what's going on in sports. So yeah, big up to you for sure, and all your endeavors. I really hope you get more, bigger interviews, doing your thing. Like, that's what this is about. So love that. My second shout out is today, Team Canada's basketball team has moved up to the 5th in the world of the power ranking. Now, y'all don't know this, but Team Canada has not made a FIBA Cup in a while. I'm not sure how long it is, but it's been a long time. they made the FIBA Cup and another top 5 ranked in the world power ranking, which is great. So big up to the official roster. They announced that today. So big up to Team Canada basketball. Big up to the roster. I love seeing all the different like interviews that they're doing, and you could tell they have a really good community in Team Canada basketball. And I hope this is, guys, a new era of Canadian basketball players playing for Team Canada, and us, because we should be top 5 minimum, no matter what, every year, respectfully. Because we got the second most players in the NBA. So I hope we keep, moving up in the trajectory as being a top 5 team in the world. So that's my shout out, Fahim. What you got?
Nice. My shout out as always, Giancarlo, always great having you through. Just want to shout you out just for, your grinding, the interviews that you're getting, and just being a supporter of our podcast. Is somebody that we'd like to reach out to, and when you come through, you come in and you really educate, because there's a lot of things in regards to the fight game that I do wonder off the side. So it's great that you gave that insight on it today. So I want to definitely shout you out just for what you do. Enough respect every time.
Big up.
All right. And on that note, Nelly J, let's put this episode in the books.
Y'all, that was the Good Rookie Show. So y'all, if you had a good time, you enjoyed yourself, please like and subscribe and tell a friend. Fahim.
We're on all platforms if you're looking for us. You know what it is. Giancarlo, we appreciate you, man, every single time. It's Good Rookies Show, and we out.
Peace.